Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. I'm Ian Demars. Alongside me is Ryan Solomon. And Ryan, how was your 4th of July this past week?
It was pretty good. Good time celebrating with the family and the friends and the eating and the fireworks.
Yeah, definitely a good time. Did you happen to catch Joey Chestnut in the hot dog eating contest?
I didn't catch it live, but I heard that he was very successful again.
He was successful. He did not break another world record, unfortunately, but he did eat 71 hot dogs, so that's still saying something.
I don't quite understand the logistics of how that many hot dogs can actually fit inside of a human being. It doesn't seem actually possible.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it's possible either. Obviously, it's just a lot of stomach capacity training, but I mean, they're the professionals, so they know how to do it best with anyone.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I heard that one tip is you're not supposed to starve yourself to make yourself more hungry the night before. You're supposed to eat a really big meal and then it has time to digest and stretches out your stomach if you ever wanted to competitively eat.
That's something to keep in mind, or something for me to jot down in case I ever want to enter that world. But
Yes, certainly.
all right, let's move on to the show. So we had some interesting news happen throughout this past week in the NFL. We did have unfortunate passing away. So let's get started. So let's talk about the most recent news that happened, and that involves Tyreek Hill. So there was another audio release recording that was released recently that basically in it Hill summarized that he denied doing any of the actions regarding towards his child or towards his fiancee girlfriend at the time. The NFL is still reviewing the case, possibly looking to discipline Hill for the alleged actions. With this recent audio tape being released with him stating on there that he denied doing any of the stuff, does this help him kind of possibly get his action or his disciplinary actions reduced if there were to be any handed down to him?
I'm not really sure, and I didn't get a chance to listen to the video. So I was actually hoping you could shed some more detail on what actually was on that recording.
Yeah, so I mean, there wasn't really too much to go off of. Basically, he obviously the reason why we've been talking about Hill over the last couple of months is because there's been audio recordings of him saying or basically pointing towards him abusing children, abusing women, and this most recent one, he clearly states on there that he denied doing that to his child and to his girlfriend or fiance. So the NFL has been reviewing all the information over the past couple of months. They did meet with him for over 8 hours about a month ago, and now this one recently comes out again as it seems like the NFL is starting to get closer to a decision.
So essentially, was there nothing on the audio? No evidence of him abusing his children?
Yeah, there's no evidence, and that's the tough part about an audio clip because we can't physically see anything. It's all about having good hearing. So, him stating something, I think definitely might help him, but I mean, in a case where it's just audio, how much proof is there in the case for or against Hill?
Yeah, audio is tough, but I would think that it would be overall helpful that there wasn't anything incriminating on it. Because if you look at the other suspensions and punishments that have been levied on athletes that have been involved in abuse cases, the thing that really pushed it over the edge was actually seeing it. So if you remember, Ray Rice had a limited suspension. All of a sudden, you see the abuse, and it's totally different. It's like a 180 in terms of the punishment becoming severe. Where originally it was not. And the same thing with Kareem Hunt, too. It was like you hear, okay, there was, an assault charge, domestic violence. You don't really know what that all entails. And when you can actually see it, that's when the fans start to become restless and uncomfortable by the situation. And so the fact that there wasn't anything major happening in this audio recording, I think, is overall beneficial for Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, obviously, as you mentioned, it's very tough to tell who you're for and who you're against in this case because a lot of things are said via audio. Like it's kind of hard to prove. Like you can get word for word on audio, but unless you see a physical action, it's kind of hard to tell who's right and who's wrong in this case. Him denying the allegations in the most recent audio clip definitely does help him out. Do I think there still might be some sort of punishment that he gets from the NFL? I still think there is, whether that's a fine, whether that's a suspension. Who knows what's going to happen? It could end up possibly getting to a point where the Chiefs end up having to release him. There's a lot of different possibilities to go at. We have discussed this before, but this is something that does help his case. But like I said, it's unless for some reason we see something from TMZ, because we know it, they would be the ones that come up with it, a video showing something, then it's going to be very hard for the NFL to give a harsh punishment towards Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I just think that lack of video evidence is overall beneficial. And I was thinking when it was first told that there was an audio that you would actually hear something bad on it. Hear something where he is actually talking about abuse. He's actually in the process of abusing somebody. So I think it's a relief for all Chiefs fans out there not to have to deal with any sort of incriminating evidence.
Yeah, it's definitely a positive sign for Chiefs fans, but the real reason why this is becoming an issue for Hill is because he has past history of doing incidents like this. He did this in college where he beat on his pregnant girlfriend at the time. One of the reasons why he ended up leaving Oklahoma State. So that's one of the main reasons why I think this is becoming such a big deal, because there is past evidence showing that he has this kind of behavior. So that's going to play, I think, a little bit into what ends up happening to him. How soon will we get that decision? I don't know, but this is probably something that's going to continue on throughout training camp for sure.
Right. I think it's going to probably continue for a while. And what it also does is it sets up another strike on his scorecard. And if he messes up again, that could be strike 3.
Yep, and we all know what happens with 3 strikes. You end up being out. But let's move on to a different subject. So we did have an NFL player retire over the past couple days, and that was Glover Quinn. He played safety in the NFL, played for the Texans and the Lions. A lot of people might know him for his days with the Lions, was a Pro Bowler. He played 10 seasons in the league. He's only 33. Are you a little bit surprised that he is retiring?
A little bit. And if you look at his resume, he's actually probably been underrated in his time in the NFL. He's only made 1 Pro Bowl, but with his time with the Lions, he was making 148 consecutive starts, which is more than any other active safety. And he also, with Detroit specifically, was the only player for them during that time to have at least 400 tackles, 15 interceptions, 10 tackles for loss, and 5 forced fumbles. And he also holds the record for most interceptions for a safety in Detroit Lions history. So for that franchise, he was actually very valuable to them. And I would assume that he could have played for some team at a high level after being released by the Lions. But I think he just decided to kind of hang it up a little early, not try to put his body through any more punishment. He probably made enough money to kind of survive on for the rest of his life if he put it to good use and didn't waste it. So I think that it's sort of a continuing trend that you're going to see with these players. Once they've made enough, they're sort of going to bow out early if there's not a high demand for their services.
And that's the point I was going to touch on. That's becoming a trend in the NFL now. We're seeing a lot more players that typically would retire past the mid-30s, retire earlier in their career. And part of that has to do with the whole concussion scenarios. Part of that has to do with injuries. Part of that just has to do with wanting to be with your family and not wasting some of those good times with your family. So there were reports that after their last game this past season, where they won against Green Bay, that he had talked about contemplating retirement. The Lions ended up letting him go in the offseason, but they did so that he would have that opportunity to kind of evaluate his options, see if he did want to play for the team that he wanted to play for, or end up retiring, which he ended up doing. So I'm not as surprised by it as I think you or some other people might be, just because this is becoming a trending thing. We're going to start seeing this a lot more in the NFL, I do believe. And it kind of depends on that point where you're in the league. Like, some of these guys that are just coming into the league, I think that's where this trend's going to be. From 10 years to now, we're going to see a lot more players retire early. So if you are a guy who's been in this league for more than 10 years, those are the guys who are probably going to play into their mid to upper 30s, possibly even early 40s. With these last 10 years, with all the concussions, incidents, and all the precautionary things that the NFL has done to prevent injuries, this is something that NFL players have looked at more, and they're starting to realize I need to make enough money within my 10 years in the league, because if I can do that, I can retire and know that I had a successful career, and that's something that I believe Glover Quinn achieved, and because of that, I think he made a good decision to retire.
I think what that's going to do also with more players retiring early is it's going to open the door for other players that maybe back 20 years ago would have retired even earlier because they couldn't find a spot on a roster. And now I think there's going to be more roster spots opening up. So some of the young players we used to see just getting out of the league extremely early after one season or two seasons of failing to find a spot are going to make a team now. And so I think that that's going to open a lot of opportunities up for these younger guys. And you're going to see generally shorter careers in the NFL, except for positions like kicker, quarterback, maybe, things like that.
Yeah, and you look at this kind of leads some of these college players that come into the league question whether they should play those 3 years in college, because with the XFL starting, you don't necessarily have to play 3 years in college to enter that league. So we could start seeing a bunch of scenarios where some of these players, they maybe play a year in college, go to the XFL for a couple years to get some professional football started, assuming that it lasts that long, and then jump over to the NFL. That way they have more of that time to get some money and set up possibly a good life for after football.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think if they invest wisely, they're going to be in a great position because it doesn't take that many years of an NFL salary to have wealth that could potentially be generational wealth if you put it in the right place.
Yeah, I agree. Do want to give a hats off to Glover Quinn. He did have a great career. Obviously, with us being Packer fans, it was sometimes tough to watch him, but he did definitely have a solid career for both the Lions and the Texans.
Yep, you ready to talk about some sad stuff?
Yeah, let's. Unfortunately, we do. There are some points in the NFL where we do have to talk about some sad stuff. The first one we're going to look at is a Dolphins defensive tackle, Kendrick Norton. So this past week, Kendrick Norton was in a car accident where I believe it was his truck flipped over, and it was on the side where one of his arms was actually on the bottom, and as a result, his arm had to be amputated. So that's an unfortunate incident. However, there is a little bit of a bright side to it because the NFL has made the decision to pay for all of Norton's medical expenses. So first, let's talk about the injury to Norton. So obviously, this is something that's going to impact the rest of his career. Likely, we won't see him be playing any more professional football. How unfortunate is this?
I mean, that's really unfortunate for him as a young guy. Not even just with his NFL career, just losing an entire limb is obviously very difficult to deal with and impacts the quality of your life for the rest of your life. And it's nice that the NFL paid for his medical bills, but it's not going to set him up forever just to have his medical bills paid for. And for the NFL, that's basically tossing a dime in a wishing fountain is the equivalency of whatever money he got for his medical bills. So very sad for Kendrick Norton. It's not necessarily like he was a breakout star that we were going to see for years and years, but he was probably on his way to making a decent living for himself for at least 3 to 5 years before this.
Yeah, and Norton was a guy who has been somewhat of a practice squad player throughout the early part of his career, and it is unfortunate that this is something that would happen to him because who knows what could have happened this offseason, or who knows what could have happened in training camp. Maybe he shows enough to become a full-time member of the roster. I mean, the Dolphins are somewhat of a rebuild, as you could say. So he could probably have a chance to get some opportunity, assuming that the accident didn't happen. It is unfortunate, but let's give a hats off to the NFL for paying for his medical expenses. With that, what does this say about the NFL in general?
That the NFL is trying to look like it's not a ruthless corporation that only cares about profits.
That sums it up right there.
Yeah, it's like a small act of charity that they can point to whenever they're accused of being a corporate juggernaut. And they can say, hey, remember that Kendrick Norton guy when we paid for his medical bills? And it's like, well, that was a minuscule fraction of the revenue that you get every year from these players. So it looks good on paper. It's nice for Kendrick Norton to not have to worry about his medical bills, but in reality, it's not a huge gesture by the NFL.
Yeah, it's definitely something that gives the NFL some good recognition, but with obviously, yeah, they make a crap ton of money. So, but the fact that they are willing to help him out, who knows? Maybe they help him out somewhat with it the rest of his, or at least the next few years, since he won't be getting what it looks like any sort of NFL salary. So this could end up being something that could be a good tell story for the NFL. But it's for now, this is just something that it's good. But if you do more, this is something that could be great.
I don't know how much they're going to go into providing a salary for him. I don't know if the NFL has an AD&D sort of policy for outside injuries not incurred while on the field or at practice, but wait and see, we shall. We're going to go something even more sad now. Jared Lorenzen, formerly known as the Hefty Lefty, the quarterback for, I want to say, Kentucky when he played college, and then I believe drafted by the New York Giants, passed away at the age of 38.
Yeah, it's a very unfortunate incident. I mean, for those of you who don't remember watching Jared Lorenzen, if this guy was one of you can make it. I'll say this: this guy was the biggest NFL quarterback that we are ever going to see. This guy was a boss on the field. This guy in college owns multiple records still at Kentucky. And you look at some of his highlight videos, this guy could move around for being a big guy. This guy could move around, not just in the pocket, but outside the pocket, give you some good scrambles. So he definitely was entertaining to watch. And even when he had his opportunities in the NFL, he never was a starter. As when he was with the Giants, obviously he was behind Eli Manning, so couldn't really get too much opportunity. But when you saw him in preseason or in some garbage time, he was impressive. And this is an unfortunate passing. He did have some setbacks once he was out of the NFL. He gained a lot of weight. He still played football in multiple different sorts of leagues, but there was a point where he did get over 500 pounds. He had lost some weight, but obviously when you're that heavy, you do start to have some health issues, and it looks like that those health issues did end up costing him his life at 38. What's something that you remember about Lorenzen, Ryan?
The thing I'll remember about him most is that seeing him play the quarterback position with such an impressive girth reminded me of when you go on Madden and did a create a player and you made him like a lineman who was like 400 pounds but playing quarterback, and you see him running around out there at like average person speed, and he wasn't even slowed down at all, but it was humorous just because of how chunky he was. That was like the real thing. I don't know if we'll ever see a quarterback that weighs as much as Jared Lorenzen get a chance in the NFL ever again.
Yeah, the one thing I remember about him is his days after the NFL. I was looking him up on the internet one day just because I was curious where he was at. He was in an indoor league. He had gained more weight, but he was still shifty as he was in the NFL. He could still move around in the pocket, make the defenders miss him. He could still zing the ball. So this guy, even though he did have some unfortunate setbacks health-wise once he left the NFL, this guy is still a phenomenal athlete for his size. It just shows that you might be a bigger person, you might be someone that doesn't necessarily fit the position or fit the part in a sport, but just because you are, some say, an outlier, that doesn't mean that you don't belong. And Jared Lorenzen was a guy who definitely did belong.
That's a very good point, and I think people can learn a lesson from his success getting to the NFL. But think how good he could have potentially been had he just dropped some weight.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, who knows if a team would Do you think that was part of the reason why he never really got a chance to start in the NFL was because of the weight?
I mean, I think that the difference would probably be somewhat negligible. He would actually be able to scramble around fairly well, and there have been other quarterbacks that have been pretty big. None of them that have necessarily panned out, but I don't think that it was something that stopped people from giving him a chance. I think that he was a decent backup quarterback, and there's only probably at any given time in the NFL 15 quarterbacks that are legitimately really good starters, and he just kind of fit into that role of backup, and that was just kind of how it was.
That's true. I do remember there was one time where he was actually projected to start one week and was against the Packers. They had already ruled Eli Manning out of the game, and then Sunday morning comes about an hour before the game. They say, "Oh, Eli Manning's going to play now," and I was just like, "I finally wanted to see this guy play, and I don't." It was an unfortunate time, but I did get to see him play, and he did have a good. For being a backup, you could say that he was a well-known backup.
Yeah, one of the more well-known backups. That's very true.
Yeah, and again, unfortunately, he did pass away this past weekend at the age of 38. We do hope that the rest of his family is doing okay, and we hope that they're able to get past this. We do have some more unfortunate news. It just seems like this whole episode has been a lot of unfortunate news, and that is that former Patriots linebacker now working for ESPN, Teddy Bruschi, did suffer a stroke this past 4th of July as well. It's unfortunate for him, but obviously he had a great career, and it is looking like that things are recovering well for him. So it looks like should be able to go back to his normal life. What are your thoughts on this?
Didn't Teddy Bruschi have some sort of issue in the past as well in terms of his health?
Yeah.
Was it another stroke?
I can't remember if it was a stroke or if he had some sort of cancer. I can't remember, but he has had health issues in the past.
I wonder if they're going to link it to CTE.
That definitely is a possibility, and knowing the past, it definitely is something that a lot of these major things that we're seeing on the NFL could possibly always get linked to this. I mean, the death of Jared Lorenzen, even though he was overweight, that's possibly something they could look at. So I am curious with you as well. I do think that could be a possibility.
Yeah, and other than that, my only thoughts are hopefully he gets a fast recovery, because I think he's actually a solid analyst on the NFL shows. Whenever he's on ESPN, NFL Live, he has a pretty good understanding of the game, and he brings a lot of good things in terms of his commentary.
For sure he does, and hopefully he is able to get back soon. Otherwise, hopefully the recovery continues to go well, and by the time the start of the season starts, we can see him back on ESPN over the next couple of months. But let's switch gears now and look at some of the stuff for this upcoming season. So obviously, this is a big year for some big-time quarterbacks. Guys like Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, Andy Dalton, Derek Carr. These are some of the quarterbacks that are kind of at that point where if they don't show something impressive this year, they could possibly get booted and might be on a different teams come next year. So looking at these four quarterbacks, Ryan, which one do you think has the most to prove this upcoming season?
I went back and forth on this question a few times, and I kept looking at different guys on the list, and I kept thinking, man, all of these guys really do have something to prove this season, or they're going to be looking for a new team next year. But the one that sticks out to me the most has to be Jameis Winston. And that's because he has not only had issues on the field, but he's also been sort of troublesome off the field. It doesn't seem like he's been successfully able to lead that team or be a voice as a leader. When you saw Ryan Fitzpatrick last year come in and people took even more of a liking to him than they did to Jameis, you kind of know that there might be some sort of problem when your supposed franchise quarterback can't rally the troops like the backup can. But he really needs to do something this year in terms of his play. Bruce Arians is his coach now. Bruce Arians has a history of being able to manage people well, getting the most out of his players. So if Jameis can't do it with Bruce Arians, I don't know who Jameis can do it with. But he was that former first overall pick who obviously has a lot of weight on his shoulders now because he just hasn't performed up to the expectations that people have had of him.
Yeah, this was tough for me too, and Jameis Winston obviously is one that stands out with him being a former number one pick. You look at these other quarterbacks on the list, Marcus Mariota, we're, the offense has been inconsistent, but he has made it to the playoffs and they have gone to the divisional round. So I'm going to give him a pass. Andy Dalton, he's had an up and down career. He's led the Bengals to the playoffs, but they still can't get past that wild card round. So because of that, I'm going to give him a pass just because he's been injured the last couple years as well. Jameis Winston is a guy you can make an argument for. As you had said, he's had multiple issues on and off the field, was suspended last year, and was kind of flipping, starting, and backing up with Ryan Fitzpatrick. But he does have a new coach there, so I'm going to give him a pass, and I'm going to go look at Derek Carr. And Derek Carr is in a weird scenario right now. So second year under John Gruden, a guy who praised Derek Carr during his Gruden quarterback camps before Derek Carr was drafted. Now, this is a big year for Oakland in general because it's their last year in Oakland before they moved to Vegas. So you can look at it a couple different ways. They could have a bad year and then go to Vegas and be successful. They could have a very good year and then go to Vegas and struggle for the first couple of years. And you look at Derek Carr, ever since getting that huge deal, he's played very inconsistent. He hasn't played up to that mega deal that he signed a few years ago. And because of that, you look at some of the weapons he has this year. Has Antonio Brown now on that team. So that's definitely something that's going to spark the offense a little bit. You look at some of the moves that the team made in general. He's got to get a good start to the season. Like, if this team is under 500 after 5 games, I think that they're going to be at that point to possibly look into maybe switching quarterbacks at that point. They need to get off to a good start this year, and obviously it's tough playing in the AFC West when you have the teams of Kansas City and the Chargers up there. But Derek Carr needs this more than Oakland needs to prove something this year. Because okay, they're getting a fresh start next year going to Vegas. But just because they're going to Vegas doesn't mean you're going to be a part of that team. They could easily let you go and look to rebuild. And you look at next year's quarterback class is going to be very big in regards to some of these teams looking to get a good quarterback. Look at Alabama's quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert from Oregon. Those are some real big names that could be factors come draft time next year in 2020. So if Derek Carr doesn't show something, whether that's get this team to a 500 record or somehow get them into the playoffs, then he's not going to be the starting quarterback for that team. Sure.
I think that he's a good pick. As I said, I think any of these players are a good pick. I think the one that has the biggest chance to be successful next year is actually Andy Dalton, because the division that he's in is so lackluster compared to these other quarterbacks that we mentioned. I mean, these other quarterbacks are in some of the toughest divisions in the NFL. You mentioned the AFC West with the Chiefs and the Chargers in there. You talk about the NFC South with the Falcons, the Saints, the Panthers, and the Buccaneers being the bottom of that division. Andy Dalton and the Bengals, they could at least conceivably get to that second in the division spot, maybe get a wild card. Who knows, if Cleveland has a bad season and Pittsburgh doesn't rebound, they could even get first place in the division if everything comes together for them. So I think out of these 4, Dalton probably has the most realistic chance to actually turn it around.
Yeah, I agree with you on that point because he does play in the easier division of the others. As I said, Carr has to go against the Chiefs and the Chargers. You look at Mariota has to go against the Colts and the Texans.
And the Jaguars.
And the Jaguars. Can't forget the Jaguars, of course, with them getting Nick Foles. You look at Winston. That division's just tough in general with the Saints, Falcons, and Panthers. And you look at that AFC North. There's a lot of question marks. Can the getting Odell Beckham help out the Browns and improve them like they did last year? Can Baltimore continue their success with Lamar Jackson? Can Pittsburgh still stay atop without 2 of the 3 killer bees? And then you got Cincinnati, who was looking like they were a playoff team last year before multiple injuries wrecked their season with Andy Dalton, AJ Green, Tyler Boyd ended up being one of them as well. So they have a good chance to do well this year. And Andy Dalton's got some pressure on them too. They drafted Ryan Finley out of North Carolina State on day 2, or it was day 2 or day 3. So he has. I agree with you. All these quarterbacks have something to prove. Andy Dalton, I think, has the least to prove though, because I think he has the least amount of pressure.
And I think we can agree that for all 4 of these quarterbacks, if they go out there and throw an absolute duck of a season and perform terribly, I think all 4 would be gone. I don't think there's one that is safe from a bad season this year.
Yeah, I think if there's one I could let slide, it might be Mariota, but he has had some of an injury past. So if they struggle this year and he misses some time, then I could see that going. However, if he plays a full season and there's other parts of the team that's struggling, I think that he would still stay.
I mean, we've seen that team isn't bad, though. They've been able to get to the playoffs even with subpar quarterback play.
It's very true. Let's switch gears now. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see how all 4 of those quarterbacks develop during training camp and how they end up playing this season. But let's move on to some other younger quarterbacks, and that goes back to our question of the week last week. So question of the week last week was asking which quarterback's going to start more games for rookie quarterbacks in the NFC East. It was either Daniel Jones or Dwayne Haskins, and Twitter and Facebook were both unanimous. 80% of people on Facebook said that it was going to be Dwayne Haskins. 82% on Twitter said it was going to be Dwayne Haskins. Obviously, we were both, it appeared we had both thought it was going to be Haskins based off of scenarios. I know you had said based off of your predictions that it was going to be Haskins with that division. And then I had said he has the best opportunity based off of the QB scenario in his case. So I think we're both on agreement with that. So let's move on to this upcoming week question, which hasn't posted yet, but do keep an eye out for it on Facebook and Twitter. And we're going to be talking about a couple of big teams that made statements last year. And those were the teams out in Los Angeles. So the Chargers and the Rams. So the question of the week is, which team is going to be more successful this upcoming year? Is it going to be the Chargers or is it going to be the Rams? Ryan, I'll have you answer that first.
Ooh, that's such a tough question. I think the Chargers are going to be more successful this year. I picked them to win that division over the Chiefs, so I don't think I can back down on them. But I also did pick the Rams. But I think that you do encounter somewhat of a Super Bowl hangover if you get there and don't win. We've seen it with pretty much every team in history except for the Patriots. And it's not to say that the Rams won't get back to the playoffs because I think they are the best team in their division. But I think this is the Chargers' really last push to try to get Philip Rivers into a Super Bowl and beyond. His time is starting to run out. He's contemplated retiring, and then all of a sudden they're going to have to potentially rebuild that team around a different quarterback and maybe even a different style of play. So I think the Chargers are going to really come together this year and have one last push to get Philip Rivers over that hump.
And I actually agree with you. I do think that it will be the Chargers. And the reason why I'm going with the Chargers is a couple of things. I think the road in the AFC, despite having the Patriots, is easier to get to the Super Bowl than is the NFC. I think the NFC has a lot more equal competition, which is going to make it tough to kind of see who's going to win that division. The AFC, if you have someone that can compete with the Patriots, that's going to make you very close to getting there. So I think that's the reason. But the other reason is I'm still concerned about Todd Gurley and his knee. So we still don't know. He's had some knee injuries in the past, and we saw how it affected him last year in the postseason. Or at the end of the regular season too, where times where he wasn't even getting the majority of the carries. It ended up being C.J. Anderson, who ended up finishing the year hot. Until we hear something saying that he's good to go, he's 100%. Him saying he's pretty good isn't saying he's 100% and saying he's ready to go. There's still something that's hidden that they're not telling anyone. And they're going to be good for the next few years. They have a young team with McVay, Gurley, and Goff. So they're going to be good. And you ask me this question next year, I'll probably say the Rams. But this year, based off of the team that I think needs it more, and because of that they're going to be more successful, it's going to be the Chargers.
Yeah, so we're in agreement on that one. We'll have to see what other people think about it.
Yep. Again, that question will be posted over the next day or two on Facebook and Twitter. So go out there, take a vote, and then if you are in disagreement with Ryan and I, definitely give us a comment, and we'll give you a shout out next week. But let's move on. So these last couple of weeks, we've started making some preview predictions for the upcoming season. We focus on the AFC, the NFC, and the wild cards. This week, we're going to start making some picks for awards. So this week, we're going to focus on the MVP, the Offensive Player of the Year, and the Defensive Player of the Year. So let's start in descending order. So let's start with the Defensive Player of the Year award. Ryan, would you like me to go first, or do you want to take this one?
I can go first with this one because my answer is incredibly boring. I think it's going to be Khalil Mack. And we saw how dominant he could be last year. He was the most dominant force on defense in the NFL. And in my opinion, was 75% of the Chicago Bears' success last year. I think the Bears aren't going to be as good this year, but I think Khalil Mack is going to continue disrupting backfields in a way that no other player is capable of doing. So I'm going Khalil Mack for Defensive Player of the Year.
And Khalil Mack definitely is a good option to go with. I'm curious to see if he's able to play consistently. He's had some consistency issues in the past, so that'll be interesting to look at to whether he is going to be able to play at that level or not. I'm going to go with the defensive player, obviously, as well. I'm going to go with the lineman. I'm going to go with Joey Bosa. Now, if this guy stays healthy, that Chargers team is going to be very dangerous defensively. And we saw how big of an impact he has been in the NFL, and I think that, as I said before, the Chargers, they're hungry this year. They were a team that a lot of people thought would get to the Super Bowl, and they got flat out destroyed in the playoffs by the Patriots. They're coming out hungry this year. They're going to be looking to be super aggressive on defense, which they have been over these last couple of years. And I think Joey Bosa, playing healthy, is going to push that team because I think we could see him put up 15-plus sacks this year and be a difference maker on that defense. So that's why I'm going to go Bosa.
Okay, I like the pick there.
All right. Let's move on to offensive player. I'll go first on this one since you went first last time. So I'm going to go with the guy who I've been high on. I did mention this in my picks for when we were doing our bold predictions and everything. So offensive player of the year, I'm going to go with Chargers Melvin Gordon. I think he's set to go off this year. He's been improving steadily over these last couple of years. He did have a little bit of a setback last year, injury-wise, but I think this all depends on health as well for him. But I've seen what this guy's done in college. This guy was a dominant force his last year in college for the Badgers, and he's been a very good, reliable player for the Chargers since coming into the league. Look out for Gordon this year. I think he could be one of those guys that goes for 1,000 and 1,000 in rushing and receiving. There are a few guys that I think have a great possibility to do that. I think he's one of those outsiders that not many people are talking about because he wasn't really known as a receiving back in college. But he has shown that he can catch the ball in the backfield. I think that he's going to make a statement this year and win the Offensive Player of the Year.
I was going to mention, but you did, because we always have to, that his biggest knock was that he was not a good receiver when he was in college. And he's clearly proven that he can be a dual threat back. I'm going to go with an incredibly bold prediction here and bandwagon on what I said a couple of weeks ago with which teams were going to end up doing well this year. I'm going Offensive Player of the Year, Nick Foles. So I think Nick Foles is going to revitalize the Jaguars team in a way that not many people are actually expecting. I think he's a quality quarterback, and they have good enough pieces around him to just let him sit back there, do his thing, and find his receivers. I think that he's going to lead the Jaguars to a really good season, and the fact that he's going to be so dominant at the quarterback position is going to lead to him getting some accolades such as Offensive Player of the Year.
And that would be something that would be very awesome to see in the NFL. See a guy who's kind of been a journeyman, who's had that opportunity as the guy for a team, who's fallen back, and if he was able to reach that plateau again and become a dominant player, it'd be definitely awesome to see. So I do love that pick you have there. I know you've been riding the Jacksonville bandwagon this year. I know I was doing it the last couple of years. So hopefully it'd be awesome to see you right on this one.
Yeah, I think it would be awesome to see too, and I'm expecting it. I think that team is going to be solid. Let's talk MVP though. Do you want me to go first for this one?
Yeah, I'll have you go first.
All right, I'm pretty sure I said this in our bold prediction section, but I have Saquon Barkley as my guy for MVP, and it's somewhat rare for a non-quarterback to get MVP, but not obviously unheard of. And the second position that usually gets it is running back. And I think Saquon kind of set the table for this award with what he did last year as a rookie, and I think now he's going to cash in on the good vibes that people had from him last season. People are expecting him to be good, and if he can be as good as last year with a competitive New York Giants team and not a team that's fighting for last place in the division, but rather fighting for a playoff spot, fighting for going late in the playoffs, I think that would be a big deal for him and could carry him past some of these other guys that are very solid, but maybe not helping their team as much as Saquon Barkley does.
And you can make a good argument that the Giants wouldn't have even been as good as they weren't that good last year, but they would have been terrible if Barkley didn't play like he
Yeah,
played.
could have been real bad.
So if they are able to play well, get into the playoffs, he's going to be the reason why. So that's a very good pick. I'm going to go with a guy who's kind of on the outside. That's because he's not a quarterback. He's not a running back. He's a defensive player. And this guy
Talking crazy.
Yeah, I'm talking crazy. This guy's won Defensive Player of the Year back-to-back years. I think this year he takes the leap and wins the MVP. I'm going to go with Aaron Donald. This guy is a force as a defensive tackle, defensive end in the NFL. This guy causes lots of double teams, but yeah, he's still able to get by and get sacks on quarterbacks and gets a good amount of tackles as well. Watch out for him this year. If he has a better year than the last couple of years, I think he has a chance to push to 20 sacks this year. And if he does that, keeps the Chargers in the playoff hunt, it's going to be tough for them to win the division this year. I know I have them as a wild card, but I think that even if they don't win the division, because of his impact defensively, that defense is going to be a lot better this year. They kind of slipped back a little last year. I think that because of his impact, which we've noticed the last few years, that's going to make him the MVP this year. It's going to be very tough to make this guy the MVP with a lot of star talent on offense. But this guy is a stud on defense. This guy has the great chance to shock the NFL universe and win the MVP.
Man, I just don't know if we'll ever see a defensive player win it again, let alone a defensive lineman. That's a tough ask.
It is, but I'm that guy who's willing to take that risk.
All right, we'll see if it pays off for you. You'll be looking like a genius if his name gets called when they announce the MVP. But it's that time of the show where we have to talk about some fantasy football. And we traditionally talk about people that you should draft. And this week we've switched it up a little. We're going to go top 5 people that you should avoid drafting in your fantasy drafts this year. And I'm thinking that we do it 5-1 alternating picks. So we'll go your 5, then my 5, then your 4, then my 4, etc.
Sure. All right. So I'll go first. So number 5, I have Larry Fitzgerald, and this is a guy where it's tough to draft him because he is his team plays so inconsistent, and the spread that he gets catching the ball is so inconsistent. There are weeks where he'll get you like 7, 8 grabs, but he's only going to get you like 40 yards. Then there are weeks where he'll get you that amount at 100 yards. There are weeks where he'll get you 1 grab and a touchdown. He's very inconsistent, and those are guys you do not want to have in fantasy football. I drafted him last year, and I kind of realized that as his team struggled. So this is a guy where if you do draft him, don't draft him with your top 5 picks. This is a guy where you don't want to waste him early on. He's okay getting drafted later, but this is not a guy you want to draft early in drafts.
I could see him even falling to a waiver wire type place.
Yeah,
because people are expecting Christian Kirk to kind of take over as the main pass catcher. You have a rookie quarterback. You don't really know what's going to happen there, who his favorite targets are going to be. So it's a perfectly valid pick.
All right. So am I doing all my 5 first and then?
Nope. I'm going with my 5, and my number 5 is Kareem Hunt. And I put Kareem Hunt on this list because of the competition that he has in his backfield in Cleveland. So we know Nick Chubb has been coming on strong lately and is planning to be the featured back based on what everybody's talking about. And aside from Nick Chubb, you also have Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham Jr. in the mix also. And if you don't think that occasionally those guys are going to get carries on reverses and things like that, then you are out of your mind, because they need to get the ball in their hands as much as they possibly can. Basically, Kareem Hunt is in a situation where the only way he's going to be relevant is if Nick Chubb either gets injured or if they just score so many points that there's enough to go around. And while people are expecting the Browns to be an offensive juggernaut this year, I'm not seeing them as being the Patriots from when they went almost undefeated and just could score points for days and everyone got points. I think that there's going to be main characters here that are going to get the ball a lot, and I think Kareem Hunt is going to kind of suffer because of that.
Yeah, and with him being suspended the first half of the year, that definitely hurts his play as well. So if you're a team that thinks there's a possibility, obviously make that risk. But 8 weeks, that's a long time, and he's not appealing the suspension.
Yeah, so, exactly.
That's definitely someone you should avoid for sure.
It's a long time on the shelf for very little reward.
I agree. Let's see.
I bet, though, that he'll be on the hot pickups list when his suspension is about to end, just because people are going to be in desperate need of a running back. So
yeah,
don't be fooled.
Yeah, I could see some teams picking him up a month before he gets done, even just because of how impactful they think he could be. But let's see. You want me to go number 4 next?
Yep. Do it.
All right. Number 4, I'm going to running back as well. I'm going with LeSean McCoy. And last year was a down year for him. He definitely struggled, had a rookie quarterback, but that team just didn't play well last year, and he was the reason why he couldn't run the ball. And you look at, they signed Frank Gore this offseason, so that's going to take some of the load off of him. And I think they're at that point where they know he's not going to be a part of their future. He is getting older as well. It wouldn't surprise me if maybe at some point mid-season if they end up cutting him.
Yeah, he's been a player that's been on a slow decline. He used to be a guy that you could really count on to get receiving yards, touchdowns, be the featured back, and now he's not living up to that same expectation that people had for him. I'm going with another running back at number 4. I have Latavius Murray, and I don't think that many people are thinking about drafting Latavius Murray terribly high, but he goes from a situation where he could have potentially got a decent number of carries in Minnesota, given the running back situation, to a place where he's going to be at best splitting carries with Alvin Kamara, and at worst maybe only getting a couple of carries per game. Because Kamara is such a force in the backfield that there's not a whole lot of reason to give anybody else a lot of carries unless Alvin Kamara is getting tired. So I think that that's going to be a bad situation for Latavius Murray, and people should only draft him if they need a handcuff in case Kamara were to go down.
Yeah, and he is in that scenario where after having some success as a starter, he's been known as more of a backup now. And he goes to a spot where he's going to get less opportunities with Alvin Kamara there. So the only times you're really going to see him is maybe in like some third down scenarios, or maybe some garbage time, or if that team's doing well enough, some end of the season point. So it's kind of tough to go with him here. Definitely an option to keep open if he's available after an injury, but definitely somebody you should avoid for sure drafting.
Yeah, definitely don't look for him to be a featured back unless Kamara gets hurt.
Yeah. Number 3, I'm going to go with receiver. I'm going to go with John Ross from Cincinnati, a guy who's been plagued by injuries, who's been very inconsistent, hasn't really found his opportunity with the Cincinnati Bengals. And this guy's one of the fastest guys in the NFL. If you give him a chance, maybe you do something with him. But if that team's not willing to give him an opportunity, and we've seen them attempt to try and make some unique plays with him, and it hasn't really worked out too well. They just need to run their offense, and if he's open, throw him the ball. But because they haven't been able to find any sort of production with him, he should be someone that you should avoid. There are obviously a lot more better receivers on that team, A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, but he should be someone that should be avoided over, not even should be drafted.
I agree completely. I mean, he's looking at maybe 3rd or 4th wide receiver position on the Bengals, a team that traditionally doesn't really air it out that much. And AJ Green is obviously the featured guy. Tyler Boyd showed that he could be pretty solid last year. So Ross is pretty buried on the depth chart right now and has never shown that he could be a consistent playmaker.
For sure. Who do you have at number 3?
I actually have 2 guys at number 3, but they kind of go together as a package deal. And you could just label it any Patriots running back. So I have specifically James White and Sony Michel. These guys are going to be splitting a lot of time. James White more the pass catcher, so he could be useful in PPR leagues, but I wouldn't have him be one of my featured guys. And then Sony Michel showed that he could vulture touchdowns last year. He had some games where he was really good, had some games where he was basically non-existent. And that's the trouble with Patriots running backs is you never know which one's going to be featured in any given week. You never know which one's going to be revolving in the offense, and then suddenly they disappear. So they have weeks where they boom and they have weeks where they bust, and that's the exact opposite of what you want on your team. So I always avoid Patriots running backs unless I'm in a serious bind.
Yeah, they are very tough to predict because, as you mentioned, there are some weeks where Sony Michel's got the hot hands. There's some weeks where James White has the hot hand. There are some weeks where a guy we've never heard of has the hot hand. There are so many different ways that the Patriots can go, and you could say the same thing about the receiving game as well. It's very tough to predict who's going to be the guy in fantasy for them. But if you had to pick the constant, maybe Tom Brady. But if these are, when it comes to Patriot players, as much as they might stand out as a high fantasy pick, these are guys that tend to be low-level sleeper picks, guys that you wouldn't want to pick earlier than maybe the 8th or 9th round.
You know who I think the most reliable player to pick would be on the Patriots is Stephen Gostkowski. Because even Brady has games where he may have 0 touchdowns, 250 yards, but they still score 28 points, and all the running backs scored. And then there's games where he has 4 touchdowns, no running back finds the end zone. It's crazy how variable it can be.
That's very true. And it'll be interesting to see how many of those Patriot players end up destroying our fantasy teams. But I think we're known now to kind of avoid the Patriots in general. But number 2, I'm going to go with an interesting guy. And this is because this guy was a lot of people, I think, took a high flyer on him last year. And he had a couple of good moments, but mostly what didn't get opportunity. That's Rashad Penny. That's because Chris Carson was back and healthy, and he took off for them last year. He was dominant for them. And we did see some small stretches of Rashad Penny being a great player. But we've also seen these last few years that dominant running backs coming out of San Diego State don't necessarily have dominant careers in the NFL, don't necessarily have great careers in the NFL. They tend to
What about Marshall Faulk?
I'm talking about the last 10 years or so. Marshall Faulk is definitely an exception, but I'm looking at guys like Donnell Pumphrey, or in this case, Rashard Penny. Guys who big-time playmakers at smaller colleges, but struggle in the NFL. And it's one of those cases where you look at college quarterbacks, look at some guys that went to smaller schools and have great success in the NFL, and a lot more teams are looking at that. And we see a lot of big-name schools not have that many quarterbacks go for them. This is kind of the case where you have a lot of good running backs come from good schools, but you have great running backs come from smaller schools, and they don't necessarily have that much success. And in this case, that's kind of where I'm going at with Penny. And I'm still questioning him a little bit. I need to see a little bit more from him before I'm saying, okay, I'm going to draft this guy.
I believe on most draft boards, Chris Carson is rated higher than Rashad Penny. But the Seahawks are another team that sort of flips around their running backs a lot, so you never know who's going to be the guy at any given time. It's most likely going to be somebody who's not on their roster right now, to be honest. At my number 2, I have a big-name running back. So far, I've gone all running backs, but this is Leonard Fournette. And Fournette is a guy who, when healthy, can be a real force in an offense. He can generate a lot of yards and put points on the board, especially with goal line situations. But he's been a malcontent with the Jaguars for the last couple of seasons, especially last year. And he's also been injury prone so far in his career. So if you're looking for a guy who could have great value, Leonard Fournette fits the bill. But if you're also looking for a guy that could potentially bust and leave you high and dry in the running back department, Leonard Fournette's also your guy. So last year, there was many occasions where he was either questionable or not supposed to start, and another running back on the Jaguars took the brunt of the carries. So you want your starting running back, and he's probably going to be drafted in the first 2 rounds, maybe if he drops a little bit in the third round. But he's going to be a guy that people are going to be looking for early, and I would just kind of avoid, to be honest.
Yeah, he is one of those guys where I think he will end up being a top 5 or top 6 round draft pick, but he does have that question mark of injury history. And last year we saw some off the field issues, which definitely hurt his play. So he's no longer a guy that you want to draft first or second round. He's definitely one of those guys where you're taking a risk on him at round 5 or round 6. So he's definitely someone that you could say you don't want to draft early.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to get caught up saying, oh, he's the starter, I'm going to take him early. You want to just probably pass on that unless he dropped way farther than you would expect him to be.
Agreed. So let's get to our number 1, and this is a guy we talked about him earlier in the show. You had made a big statement about him. I'm going with a quarterback, and I'm going Jameis Winston. And the reason why I'm saying this is because of a couple things. He's been known for having a turnover issue since coming to the league. He's been very inconsistent, and there are a lot of question marks, I think, on that offense with their new head coach, Bruce Arians. Now, he still has Mike Evans, and I think Evans is still going to get good production fantasy-wise. They have a good tight end in O.J. Howard. But I'm saying that Winston doesn't prove enough this year to be drafted as a starting quarterback. I think starting quarterbacks is pretty simple nowadays, where a lot of teams only draft one quarterback when it comes to fantasy. So you look at a standard 12-team league, he's probably not going to be one of your top 12 quarterbacks. And you look at when he came into the league, a lot of people thought that he was for sure going to be a top 5, top 10 fantasy quarterback. But with his so much inconsistencies and so many times he's missed games due to off-field incidents, it's at that point where he's not a guy who's going to get drafted.
He, in his career, has been able to remarkably have games where he put up huge numbers, but I think he's more of a fill-in player. Like, see how he does. If you really need a guy who's going to be boom or bust, pick up Jameis Winston if he's still starting at that point in the season. But yeah, don't bank on him being a solid starter the whole year. My number 1 is wide receiver from the Los Angeles Chargers, Keenan Allen. And Keenan Allen is a very talented player. He's been having some seasons or some games where he's really stellar, and he has other seasons where he's just very injury prone, has a serious injury, and ends up out of the season, basically. And if you look at the Chargers as a team now, they have some wide receivers that are doing well without Keenan Allen in the lineup when he's been absent. So now Mike Williams is kind of the big name there, who's probably going to get more looks than Keenan Allen will. So he's sort of been demoted to a second wide receiver. Travis Benjamin has been solid as well. So Keenan Allen, mixing the fact that he's injury prone with the fact that he's not really the guy anymore, is going to make me a little hesitant to pick him up in a standard league.
Yeah, it's tough because I'll admit I was a little surprised. And you look at last year, he had a really good year last year, and he wasn't injured for once, and it definitely helped out his fantasy aspect. But there are those question marks, and you said there are a lot more opportunities on that team now. So it does seem like that could be a possibility, that we could see him slip down the draft charts in fantasy. And who knows, maybe some leagues we even don't see him go.
I mean, I think he's a guy that has some value still, but I think he's getting a little overshadowed in that offense. And I just remember a couple of years where I was planning to take him high, or did take him high, and he got injured right away, like first 5 weeks of the season. So with that history, I think he's somebody that you should just leave unless it's really late in the game and you see him as incredible value at the spot that you're taking him.
Yeah, very good point made right there. It'll be interesting to see what does happen with some of these players that we do pick, because I feel like there's going to be at least one. There's going to be one guy in this list that we pick that breaks out this year.
Yeah, and there's going to be at least one player taken in the top 10 who's out for most of the season, because that's just how it goes. And there's almost no way to predict who it's going to be.
Yep.
David Johnson, for instance. couple
Yeah.
years ago. There's always one guy who you expect. Le'Veon Bell last year never played. Who you expect to come through and be a really good starter who gets taken in the first round and then just disappears.
Yeah, that's spot on right there. But Ryan, with that said, brings us to another conclusion of Touchdown Tuesday. So Ryan, what final thoughts do you have for the viewers this week?
Thanks again for listening and bearing with us as we talk about the NFL and other football conglomerates around the world. You can catch us live on YouTube, or you can catch us on Google Play, Spreaker, and iTunes, and keep supporting us. Be sure to also check out our NBA podcast, Run It Back. Those guys do a great job talking about basketball. And yes, have a good rest of your night, everyone.
Yep, perfectly said right there, Ryan. Again, thanks everyone. Again, this is Touchdown Tuesdays. We are the official football podcast of Boost Sports. Make sure to check us out each week, iTunes, Google Play, Spreaker, or if you want to stay up late with us in the evening, definitely do check us out on YouTube. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter as well. Keep an eye out for the episodes to get posted there, and for our question of the week and other updates regarding the world of the NFL, college football, XFL, basically anything football related. So again, do want to thank everyone for listening this week. We'll be back with another episode next week. Take care, everybody, and we hope you had a great 4th of July.